All right, so we are covering 4.1, which is graphing relationships, and 4.2, which dives into relationships and functions. So we really have some big vocab words on here. So the first one is function, then we have domain and range, and then we also have continuous versus discrete. So on our function vocab word, what we want to talk about with a function is it's a special type of relationship that, and let's write this on here, it pairs each domain value with one and only one range value. Okay. Now, as we move down, you'll notice the next two words are domain and range, and really domain is just a fancy way of saying your x values, and range is a fancy way of saying your y values. Okay. Sometimes you'll also hear that domain is called your input, because you tend to put input values into your x, and your range is oftentimes called your output. Okay, so if you want to go back and look at your function vocab, it pairs each domain value, so if you'd rewrite that as each x value with one and only one y value on there. Also in there we have the words continuous and discrete. So these are in relation to our graph. So when we talk about a continuous graph, what that means is you'll have, say, your first quadrant, and when you graph something on here, you never lift your pencil. So continuous. Okay? Versus a discrete graph on here is going to be something where you've got dots. Okay? Each value has a specific value on there. All right, so the big idea in this section is really to be able to tell, are things a function, and then to be able to talk about our domain and range. So let's go ahead and do an example. All right, so I'm going to give us a table. We're going to have our x values and our y values. We're going to have 1, 2, 5, and 6 for our x values. And then our y values, we're going to have 0, -4, we're going to have 0, and we're going to have -1. All right, so the question is, what's the domain? What's the range? And then is it a function? Okay, so if we look at this, again, some gentle reminders as we do this since we're learning. Our domain is our x values and our range is our y values. Okay, and we always list this smallest to biggest. So my domain values, small to big, are 1, 2, 5, and 6. And my range values from small to big would be -4, -1, and 0. And you only have to write that 0 one time. Okay, now the definition of a function. Each x value has one and only one y value that's associated with it. So as I look down this x column right here, I don't have any repeats on my x. Okay, so there's nothing that has a double on there. So then our answer would be yes. Another way to think about it, because I know a lot of students are visual, if I were to take those points and put them on a graph, again, your graph doesn't have to be anything fancy. Let's plot those. We would be at 1, 0. We would be at 2, -4. We'd be at 5, 0. And then we'd be at 6, -1. Okay. Another way to look at this is to talk about the vertical line test. And what we want to do on the vertical line test is draw a vertical line, which means up and down, and make sure that there's no spots on this graph that we just did where there's two dots right on top of each other. Okay, and there isn't. So that means it passes the vertical line test because there's no two dots right on top of each other. So that's a visual way to look at it. All right, let's try another example. Let's try with a table. We've got values of 7, 9, 12, 7, and 15. All right, so then my y values are going to be -1, -7, -1, 0, and 0. All right, so the questions we have to be able to answer: domain, range, and is it a function? All right, so let's look at our domain values. All right, again, listing them small to big, we've got a 7, a 9, a 12. We already represented that other 7 and the 15. All right, my range values, again, smallest to biggest, we've got -7, we've got -1, please only write that one time, and we've got 0, again, only write that one time. All right, so is it a function? Well, on here I'm noticing that I have 7 to -1, and I've got 7 to 0. So I've got two x values that are the same, and they're going to different y values. Okay, so the answer would be no, it's not a function, because again, it can only have one x value goes to one and only one y value, but I've got a duplicate. Okay, and again, if you think about this in terms of a graph, we'd be at 7, -1. We'd be at 9, way down here at -7. We'd be at 12 and -1. We'd be at 7 and 0, and we'd be at 15 and 0. And this right here, if we were thinking about our vertical line test, does not pass the vertical line test because I've got two dots right on top of each other. All right, let's do one more piece where we talk about domain and range in regards to a graph. Okay, so I'm going to put graph paper up here. I'm going to go ahead and just draw in my x and my y, and then I'm going to put a shape on here, and we're going to talk about the domain and range of this guy. So I'm going to put a dot here. I'm going to put a dot here, here, and here. All right, and I'm just going to connect the dots with those guys. All right, it's supposed to be an oval as best as I can. Now, our questions are still the same that we are answering: domain, range, and is it a function? Okay. Now, this one's a little bit different as we talk about domain and range because we are looking at continuous lines. Okay, so there's no just dots on there like we've had in the past. So as I look at my x-axis, I'm noticing that my smallest x value is located here at -3. And my largest x value is located at +3. And I have every value in between because, again, I've got my circle all the way at the top and I've got it all the way in the bottom. So every single point between -3 and +3 is being represented because it's a continuous graph. All right, so how do I show that? Well, I'm going from -3 to +3, just like we said. We're talking about domain, which is our x values. Okay, and then you put less than or equal to, less than or equal to. Just like in chapter 3 when we talked about it, our inequalities, this is representing x's in between -3 and +3. Okay, now I do the same thing with my range. I look down here and I see where does my range start, which is at -4. And I look at where my range is ending, that is at +4. So again, we go smallest to biggest, -4, all the way to +4. Since we're talking about range, range is our y value in the center, less than or equal to, less than or equal to, and you're all done with domain and range. Now, the last piece, is it a function? Well, if I were to draw a vertical line to look at my vertical line test, let's see if I just draw one in there, it's hitting it 2 times. Okay, remember it's only allowed to hit it 1 time. If there's anywhere on the graph where it would hit it 2 times or more, then your answer is no.